and our mission is to support high-growth businesses right here in upstate New York. So as an organization, we are tracking close to 800 now high-growth businesses across this region, which is incredible to think about. So for those of you that live here, have built a career here, grown up here, to see how much we've grown as an ecosystem over the years is impressive. So I'm very excited to have you all here today. Thanks, Sarah. It's all right, we're good. It's a fancy machine. So I'm very excited to have you all here today, but this event today wouldn't be possible without the support of our generous sponsors. So I wanted to take a moment to invite up my friend and colleague, John Casey from JP Morgan, to just say a few words.
Thank you, Olivia, and thanks for having us here. We're certainly happy to sponsor this event. It's been really fun to meet many of you today, and I look forward to listening to the Fireside chat here. I'll give you like 2 seconds on what Faith and I do, but so we're part of the private bank, part of JP Morgan Chase. We focus on working with individuals, families, and some institutions on regular banking, wealth management, lending, and we're here because we particularly like working with private business owners, especially early stage, because we find that we can do a lot of really helpful work for them in terms of planning for future transactions and trying to optimize use of estate tax exemptions and try to minimize capital gains taxes and kind of really plan ahead for transactions. And we do our best work the further out in front of a transaction we can be. So we like talking to people early on and seeing how impactful we can be. And we find that kind of on the tax side of things, we're really helpful. You can do great investments and outperform by 0.5% is really good. But in taxes, if you can save somebody 40% on estate taxes or some portion of 23% on federal capital gains, that's a much bigger impact. So we try to be as helpful as we can there. And yeah, we're here to help. So Faith Schumacher, my colleague, and I, if you ever have any questions on planning or investing, banking, anything, you can call us and we're happy to help.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. All right. So I would now like to take this moment to introduce our guests of honor. So today we're going to be enjoying a fireside chat. I know Martin Babnick has prepared a few questions for Brad based on his new book, which we'll have copies of available as we finish up the fireside chat. So after the program too, we'd love to open it up for questions too. It's really excited. I'm excited to hear more about this book and the journey and kind of how we can all think about really giving first, which is everything that UBC is all about. So please, Martin and Brad, come on up.
All right. Hi. Believe it or not, this is Brad's second visit to Little Falls. Ooh. Do I have to use this microphone too?
The Babinett Hotel is very wonderful. Highly recommend. 5 stars. It is. It was very hard to get a reservation.
Oh, I'm looking around for my notes.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Oh, there they are. Gosh. With, of course, the copy of the book. This is what it looks like, all right, which we will definitely be talking about. But before we get to that meat of Give First, I really want to have a little bit of a brief introduction of Brad, which all of us recognize his reputation as not just an early stage investor, but a highly respected early stage investor. And many of us get to know him through his writings before Give First was written. It's 13 books, I want to say?
9.
Oh, come on.
Thanks. Just 9.
All right. But prolific at his blogging and his social. It has spread his visibility far and wide. But when I went through Give First and also took advantage of the Give First podcast, which I encourage everyone to look through your podcast platform for the Give First podcast, because that podcast has some more detail that will amplify what you hear today. And the combination of those two made me realize how many things Brad and I have in common. We've known each other for 31 years, and yet I had still uncovered some tidbits that we're going to end up touching on today. But Brad, besides being an investor at Foundry Group, there are many other things that he's done in creating companies that we'll talk about. Feld Technologies, might touch on Interliant, but more importantly, he's had social impact as a thread that is woven through his life, and we'll speak, I can't cover all of them, but I'll just mention, besides Techstars, which is also a company, which has its social impact mission, nonprofits that included his catalyzing some new nonprofits that got started, like the Entrepreneurs Foundation of Colorado, which I want to make sure we get to at the end of our discussion today, the National Center for Women in Information Technology, the Social Venture Partners, Energize Colorado, which during the pandemic created a funding source for small to medium businesses to keep the lights on and was hugely impactful. And also his Anchor Point Foundation. And that's a family foundation that spreads philanthropy and so through social impact. And my note here is each one of these things that I just mentioned, each organization, were organizations that either started personally or catalyzed and created a team. So he's truly a serial entrepreneur, more than just an investor that many of us have come to appreciate his investing prowess because of his writings. But if we go back to the beginning, it does start with his journey that began with Feld Technologies. And 1991, do I have that about right?
87. You're increasing everything by 4. It's good. Soon I'm going to be 64 years old instead of 60.
Okay. Straighten me out. You started it. I know there's another 90, something else that happened in 91 we'll get to in a minute. That's why that date was stuck in my mind. But go ahead.
Yeah, I started my first company out of college, and I started it with one of my fraternity brothers, a guy named Dave Jolk. I knew, neither of us knew anything about starting companies. Neither of us had really thought about business. He had worked for a startup that is a company that ultimately went public while we were working together. And one of the founders of that company, a guy named Will Herman, is still one of our closest friends. And Will and I, Dan O'Sullivan, were talking about a company that was my first angel investment, NetGenesis. That company, which was funded in 1994, was founded by Raj Bhargava, who I still work with today. He was just out of college, and Will Herman and I it was our first angel investment together. So, one of the things that will go through this story are these interconnected threads in the networks that persist for very long periods of time. Feld Technologies was a business that, when we started it, we had no money. We funded it with $10. There were 10 shares of stock, each worth $1. Fortunately, when we sold the company, each share of stock was worth more than $1. There were still 10 shares of stock when we sold it, so we never raised any money. My dad was one of those 10 shares of stock. He was an advisor. We didn't really know how to think about a board member or something else. He had a medical practice and was just helpful to us. One of the things he did at the very beginning, from a financial perspective, is he personally guaranteed a loan at his bank for $25,000. So it wasn't really our money. It wasn't really him loaning us the money, but it was him being on the hook for it if we didn't pay it back. We hired a bunch of part-time people that summer. We spent the $25,000 and realized that that was all the money and that this wasn't working. We had to actually figure out how to make more money each month than we spent each month. So we fired all the people. We got out of the office we had, and we very systematically, from very early on, built a business where we made more money each month than we spent. And a year later, we had paid back the $25,000 loan, and my father, I think, didn't feel annoyed with us anymore about it. But then we built a business from there that today we would call a bootstrap business. And it was really, a very powerful beginning point for me around entrepreneurship, except it wasn't my first company. I'd had 2 other companies prior, both of which had failed. One that I started when I was a freshman in college with 4 other friends, called Martingale Software. We came up with a great idea when this new computer called Macintosh came out, to write a piece of software so you'd enter data into cells and it would print pretty graphs. But we were not very effective as college students in actually building that. So that company failed. And then I started a company called Data Vision Software that made this thing called cephalographic analysis. And the reason that's not a household word is because only one person in the whole planet ever cared about that. And he was the guy that was our initial pilot customer who we didn't get any money from. So we built a really cool thing for him that nobody else cared about. So, I had these multiple experiences that led to this first successful experience.
And then 1991, the significance of that day was your exposure to a peer group of entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
which we had in common called the Birthing of Giants program. What was that about?
So in 87 to 91, I'm building this company in Boston, and I really don't know any other founders. And I'm often the oldest person in the room. At the time, I was almost always the youngest person in the room. I had some customers that also had their own businesses, but they were customers. There was a business relationship. There was not the level of emotional intimacy that you could have with the customer, including I couldn't tell the customer I'm scared shitless that I'm not going to have any money next month, because then maybe they wouldn't be a customer anymore. I read this magazine obsessively cover to cover every month when it came out. This was really the only source of information at the time for founders like me and Martin. It was called Inc. Magazine. Still around. But I would read Inc. Magazine, and it felt very distant. Like a lot of people's stories who I didn't feel like they were not accessible. I wanted to get to that point, but I didn't really know what to do with it. And I'd pick up things here and there, but there was no community around anything. One month, there's an ad, a full-page ad, that's an invitation for founders with businesses of $1 million or more in revenue, excuse me, and under 40, to come to this 4-day retreat called Birthing of Giants, the inaugural Birthing of Giants retreat. Apply now. I applied. I was very nervous for 2 reasons. One is it costs money. And remember, I'm still making more money each month than we spend. So I'm very, very careful with what we're spending our money on. And I'm really uncomfortable spending company money on a thing like this for me. But my partner, Dave, fortunately supported it. The other was we didn't have quite $1 million in revenue. We were like $900 and something thousand in revenue. And so I applied. I got accepted. I went to this thing. And I had this amazing 4-day experience with 60 people. They were all founders. It was kind of the first time that I was with what I would describe as my people. And it was a range of companies. The biggest, I think, was $500,000 in revenue and $500 million in revenue. I was probably one of the smallest at $1 million in revenue. But all of a sudden, after you get past like the first night of, who are you and what do you do and da-da-da-da, the experience was us talking as peers about what we were going through as founders and all of the different struggles, and not in the you should do this, you should do that kind of way, but with real emotional intimacy that evolved. And it was not a party weekend. It was not a drinking fest thing. It was a bunch of people in their 20s and 30s who were all trying to find their way in this mysterious thing called entrepreneurship. And that was really, that weekend, I think, was really the spark for me of this idea of the power of what today is commonly called startup community, but is such an important integral part of the way so many people work as founders.
So it was in 93, I believe, that as I went to Birthing of Giants, and in a different cohort, because this was a 3-year program, you were on your last leg, dropped in, we happened to meet, and that journey from Birthing of Giants also led, as I understood that year, you're helping to become involved in Entrepreneurs Organization is what it's called today, but then we were young entrepreneurs. So this was the Young Entrepreneurs Organization. Can you shed
Yes.
some light on that?
So I come out of this amazing 4-day weekend, and I go back to my office, and I have to go back to work. And one of the things that was introduced in this weekend was a new organization at the time called Young Entrepreneurs Organization. I think I was about the 100th member of what's now a 25,000 member worldwide thing. And they were just starting to start up chapters in different cities. And so I get back to Boston, I go back to work, and I'm like, shit, I miss all these people. And so I joined YEO. That cost me more money too. Like I had to okay, I'm gonna make a commitment to doing this thing. But I started at the Boston YEO chapter. And once I stuck my head up and started looking around for other founders like me in Boston, but with something that we could all connect to. Not just in the, let's go out to dinner or, let's do business together, but let's actually form, a club, a gang, whatever positive language you want to put on it. That created the Boston YEO chapter. I ended up joining the YEO board, was on the YEO board for a number of years. And when I moved to Boulder in 1995, I knew one person. That was Vern Harnish, who was the founder of YEO, but also was the founder of Birthing of Giants. He moved away like 6 months later, so I knew nobody when I moved to Boulder. And I did the same thing. I started YEO Colorado, and it was just this dynamic of saying, you know what, here I am. I'm looking for other people where like me means equals founder of company. Yep. Nothing else mattered. It didn't matter what the company was, didn't matter education background, gender, experience. The one thing that I did focus on through this period of time was under 40, because I was young. And I wasn't looking for people like me and Martin at that point, because I could find that. There was a thing called Young Presidents Organization. I could go find that. But this was different. This was founders who were trying to now create new businesses, which was still in the mid-90s. Today, it's a normal part of our social structure. In the mid-90s was still a weird thing. It was odd.
Absolutely.
People my mother would say to me, can you explain to me in a way that I can explain to my friends what you do? And I'd say no. And she was very unsatisfied.
Especially as you're doing angel investing on the side. At that stage, you were starting.
Yeah, by this point, so I sold my first company in 1993 to a public company. It was the co-founders of that company who ran it were two guys, Len Fassler and Jerry Pock, and you'll read about both of them in the book. Len passed a few years ago. He was one of my closest friends, and we went on to do multiple businesses together. He's about 32 years older than me. Jerry's also still a very powerful influence on my life and a good friend. We were going back and forth the other day on something. I knew nothing about buying or selling businesses or investing in businesses, nothing. And I've now had my company acquired. They essentially decide that they want to take this, at the time, 28-year-old and get him involved in all the stuff they're doing with the business. They liked me. They obviously bought our company because they liked us. But there was something else in their style that I responded to in a way I think that was unique. And for both of them, what they let me do, and it's not the first time I'd had this experience, but they let me be with them and participate in all of the M&A activity this company was doing. This company bought about 40 companies in 3 years. We were the seventh. I became the chief technology officer, so I had a functional role that was important. But all of a sudden, I get sort of dragged into this thing that really changed the trajectory of what I was doing. It was also the beginning of the commercial internet. So I now have some money, not a couple $1 million, not a ton of money, but money. And I turned around at the time and did something that today is not that unusual, but at the time was completely foreign, which is I took that money and I invested it $25,000 at a time, sometimes $50,000, about one company a month for the next 3 years. And at the time, there was angel investors and there were angel networks, but like an active angel investor might make 1 or 2 investments a year. They really picked their spots. The angel groups, A lot of them in the 90s weren't actually active and investors at that time. They would be more cocktail parties where people would get together and torture the entrepreneurs. I pretty quickly
I've seen some of those.
Yeah, they're still around. I pretty quickly understood the difference between what I would call an angel investor and a devil investor. Because in some of the deals that I was doing, there was somebody that had put some money in that was actually like really harmful to the founder, not helpful to the founder. And I'm like, what are they doing? Like, angel, you're supposed to be like a force of good. And I was okay with the idea that a bunch of these things weren't going to work, that was part of the way this happened. And my hope was that the stuff that did work from an investment perspective just far outweighed the stuff that didn't. But the other thing that was happening at the time for me that was really profound was sort of this changing relationship with myself and the founders, myself and Len, working in this concept that today I talk about as mentorship, but that I was really starting to understand the beginnings of in terms of more than just the connectivity of the network.
And in some ways, because you get to Boulder in 1995, and you didn't know anybody, and you started to create community, and you're drawing on these lessons from even the mentoring you received from Len and Jerry at Emerita and all the other people that you had interacted with to that point. You mentioned in the book that was also, in a way, starting to coalesce around the philosophies of Give First, even though you didn't call it Give First at that point in time. So let's talk about what is Give First. How do you define Give First? And then we'll start unpacking that a little bit more as we go forward.
Yeah. So I'll define it, and then I want to explain one element of it. The definition is that you're willing to put energy into a system without knowing what you're going to get back. It is not altruism. You expect to get something back. You just don't know when, from whom, over what time period, in what consideration, and in what magnitude. And the trick that the magic trick that I was starting to understand at the time was this idea of if you're willing to engage non-transactionally with other founders, with other people on some mission you're trying to achieve. It doesn't just have to be founders, but that was the context I was operating in. But non-transactionally, not saying, I'll do this with you if, or here's the contract we need to sign, or even here's the NDA we need to sign for me to talk to you about something. It's just like, you know what, let's just start talking. Let's see where that goes. And that started to broaden significantly. And I describe it today as a philosophy, not a religion. And I distinguish between the two. A religion, here are the rules, follow these rules. You will achieve fill in the blank, whatever your religious belief is. Every religious tradition has set of rules, follow the rules, good happens. A philosophy is a set of ideas that you incorporate into the way you experience life. You don't have to adopt them all. You can pick and choose. They don't rule your life. They don't tell you how to function, but they give you a frame of reference. Siri is woken up. Hello, Siri. Siri, delete. Sorry. No, it's totally fine. It happens. It's all good. Don't worry. Don't worry. It amuses me. That Siri is not responding to me. That's the thing. I mostly, Siri, make it stop raining, for God's sakes already. But in this construct of a philosophy, you're adapting it to you rather than having it imposed on you. And what was starting to come to mind for me, and it involved things like my relationship with Martin and a relationship with a bunch of other people that were founders at the time that were working in the nascent stages of their companies, the relationship we developed with Kauffman Foundation, with YEO, and with so many other entrepreneurs that were then connected to it, was this notion of three concepts. One, you're willing to engage non-transactionally. And it really stands out in contrast today, especially in the U.S., to the way we see so much modeled by leaders, not just political leaders, but leaders across all spectrum of society in terms of defining in advance what the construct is. Second, it's a positive sum experience, not a zero-sum experience. It's not fluffy win-win, we all win together, everything's happy language. It's creating a positive feedback loop. It's lots of things don't work, but you're building energy by putting the energy into the system, being willing to try new things, see where they go, and when they don't work, you learn from them. But when they do work, all of a sudden, stuff starts coming out of that system, and the system gets bigger and more significant. And then the third is that it's something I call a multi-turn game instead of a single-turn game. A single-turn game is a transaction. We're doing a transaction. We're done. We're doing a transaction. We're done. A multi-turn game is, it's just one of many. And if I win and you lose, that sets us up for a really shitty next transaction. But if we both benefit in some way and get closer to the goals we want to accomplish, the next turn, we have more trust, we have more confidence in each other, we have an understanding of what the other person wants, you keep going. So, like, these things were starting in the mid to late 90s for me, weave together against the backdrop of something else which we were learning then, but really came to fore a decade later, was the power of a network, which was an essential part of the story of the founding of Techstars. In the late 90s, when somebody would talk about a network, nobody knew what that meant. And networking was a thing in that time period where you have to learn how to network.
Yeah. And transaction, it's like, you're going to help me with this, right?
You're going to help me with this, and can I have your business card?
Yeah.
And we're now connected, and I know this person. Like, it's very transactional. And something about that was wrong for me. I was not the person who in a big group like this stands in the middle of the group and wants to meet everybody and shake everybody's hands. I'm the guy that stands in the corner, and I don't mind people coming over to me and talking to me, but like, I was that person. Interestingly, in this time period, what was happening was I was starting to learn something that social networking has really messed up. And now today people understand what networks mean because of the technology and social networking. And I'll end this segment with that, is that your power, if you think of a network, each person is a node and the nodes are interconnected. And your power on the network is described by the size of your node. So you want your node to get bigger. Your power is not defined as the number of connections you have, which was networking, right? Classical business, introduction networking. It was also not defined by the amount of information that flowed across any individual connection. What it was the number of connections times the value of the information that flowed across your connections. So I'll just give two examples at either end. You have tons of connections and no information of value goes across any of those connections. You are not of any value to the network. Your node's very small. You have very few connections, but immense amount of value of information that goes across very few connections. You're not very valuable to that network. You want a balance between those things, and it's about the value of the information, not just the information. And that's the thing ultimately that I think really got screwed up by the existence of social networking, which is the amount of garbage that gets communicated by people for whatever reason on a continual basis that has zero value makes those networks less powerful. It's one of the things I think that even though we didn't have the technology piece of it, was so powerful about our experiences in this formidable period of time. Because the value I got from Martin when we talked, which was not every day or every week, we didn't have email even, we would talk to each other. It was immense when we spent time together working on a problem. And it wasn't just the two of us. It was me to Martin, me to this person, me to that person, me to that person, you to that person, you to that person. And that network then became very powerful. So these were foundational, thoughts that went into some of the stuff that today is encapsulated in this philosophy.
If we take the next step in the chronology and realize in that mid to late 90s was a very special time for any of us that were really deep into technology, because the internet had been introduced in a way, and now the consumers becoming involved, and the internet was going to change the world. And you were You were at the head of the table in deploying capital in early stage companies. I'm a service provider helping these companies. And we were riding that wave of growth throughout the 90s, which was just absolutely incredible. And then it all changed, all right? Because the markets fell apart in the year 2000. And the year began really strong, and before the end of the year, it was a completely different situation. It went down faster than it went up, all right? Really quick. And what is amazing to me when I think about your experience in that time is that after the world started falling apart, the tech world, at the end of 2000 and throughout all of 2001 and into 2002, anyone that had as much concentration in the sector as we did, both of us, we were in a world of hurt, all right, all of us. And yet, even during that period, you were still building community, all right? So everyone else, we're all trying to survive, and you had a lot of stuff going on, mountains of stuff, right? And yet you were still out there in that period. So in survival mode, where we want to just hunker down and survive, why were you still active in building community?
Probably a couple of reasons. One was I found that even in the most brutal, difficult moments in my own experience in business, as long as I was listening and learning and engaging around what I was doing with others, looking for value of information that could be helpful to me as I navigated through the shit show that I was dealing with, that was helpful. Some of it was not functionally helpful, like I didn't solve my problems, but it was emotionally helpful. I didn't feel alone in my problems. I didn't feel like I had to, like really be defensive. Just for the magnitude of how messy this period of time was. I mean, Martin had his challenge with it in the context of TriNet. I was on the board of 25 companies. I was part of what had become a very large venture fund that was affiliated with SoftBank. I was on the board of 5 companies internationally that all but one went bankrupt, that were all tech companies. I was on the 4 public company boards, and all of those companies had big IPOs. And at this moment in time, if you multiplied their stocks together, share prices, you got a smaller number. Is anybody in the room a good mathematician knows what that means? Anybody? They were all fractions. Every single stock price was less than $1, which is nuts. Because that's like a horrible, like bad enough that you're in single digits. Like now you're less than $1. You're going out of business. And on top of this, I was co-chair of 2 of those public companies. One was a company that at its peak, that I had co-founded with Len. At its peak, it was worth about $3 billion, a little bit over $3 billion, a company called Interalliant. It went bankrupt in 2002. The other one, interestingly, I hadn't thought about this till this moment, was Message Media, and Jerry Pock and I were co-chair of that company because he had invested in that company, and Jerry was the other Len's partner. It was interesting because the relationships working with each of them in those moments were different, and was also helpful in terms of how I think about this. But I think thing number 2 was, even in those moments, with that magnitude of stuff, the broader network that existed continued to be important to me from the standpoint of learning. But a lot of what I was learning and navigating through was also helpful to others. So many of these relationships that had been developed were now shifting and turned into peer relationships rather than one-up, one-down relationships. So I was experiencing that in a really brutal environment. And then maybe the last part of it for me was, as the internet both became more significant and at the same time the economic disaster that was the collapse of the dot-com bubble happened, I think my own insights into sort of the impact of the connecting across broad spectrums of people with different kinds of experience, and how that can help you navigate through challenging stuff was increasing because of just the intensity of the challenge, right? It's easy to say, yeah, everything's going well, these are all positive things. We're playing a positive-sum game, everything is going forward. When it's the opposite and everything is falling apart, this is just as helpful, maybe more. So it's not just about achieving some outcome, it's about how you're actually living your life in the context of this kind of work.
I could keep going on this chronology, which is really interesting because he's led an interesting life, but we have to shift a little bit of attention to the book. And I'll ask for maybe one last story that cues this up, and that's how you met David Cohen, co-founder for Techstars, and really as the result of it being a Give First move, because it's such a great illustration of Give First on your Random Day interaction in 2006?
2006. So I didn't know David. He knew of me. I didn't even know of him. He had been a successful founder of another company with David Brown, who was one of the other co-founders of Techstars. And they'd sold that company. They'd started another company together that didn't go anywhere. And they started doing some angel investing. Or David Cohen started doing some angel investing and was not enjoying it. Just felt very lonely with it. At the same time, in 2006, I had developed a very high profile in Colorado, also sort of broadly in venture, but especially in Colorado.
High profile because you had helped so many people giving first. You had a lot of friends.
Yes.
Okay.
And 2006 now, we hadn't started Foundry Group yet. That was the venture fund that we started in 2007. I still had a very large venture fund that was this thing called Mobius Venture Capital that used to be what was affiliated with SoftBank that I was running now because I was effectively the senior partner. There were 4 founders, 2 had left when the bubble collapsed, and then the other founding partner decided to move to China and start a fund in China in 2004. He's done very, very well with that. And then we had a few other partners, but I was the only founding partner left. So I had committed to continue to manage that, even though we decided as a firm not to raise another fund. That's a long segment story. I'm making angel investments again. Because my profile is high, I'm on a continual basis getting emails from people saying, can we get together for coffee? Can we get together for lunch? Whenever somebody would come to Colorado, do you know Brad Feld? You need to get connected to Brad Feld. Like it was that kind of a thing. And Boulder's only a 100,000 person town. And Denver was a bigger town, but this concentration of energy in Boulder was immense. And we were coming out of the crash. So there was companies getting started again. There was a lot of energy, all this sort of stuff. So I started doing something I called Random Days, where I met with people for 15 minutes. And I did a few of them today. I see a couple people here. We would do 15-minute meetings. I had an online calendar. Jury rigged it. You had to set it up yourself. I usually did these in a public place, so there wasn't like a queue of people to my office. Sometimes it was in my office. And my goal became, as I figured out what this was, to do 2 things in each meeting. One was to learn something. That was for me. And the other was to make a connection or be helpful in some way to the person that I met with. And if I came out of every 15-minute meeting with those 2 things, I felt like that meeting was satisfactory. But what I did was I just defined it from the standpoint of saying, hey, the next 15 minutes belongs to you. What do you want to talk about? There was no agenda. There was no structure. I didn't have a process. It was just like, here it is. Where do you want to go? On one of those days, David showed up. It had taken him 3 months. So I did these once a month. So he was a 3-month backlog. He sat down with me. If you ever met David, he's a sweet guy. He's kind of understated. He doesn't come like into the room, barreling into the room. And he sort of slid a piece of paper across the table to me. I gave me a little, let's go. I had a little timer. I pressed a little timer. I didn't do that today, but I usually have like a 15-minute timer so that I don't go long. He slid this little piece of paper to me. I can't listen and read at the same time. I have to do one or the other. So I said, all right, he started talking. I said, let me just read it. I read it, and it was a description of a thing where we would fund 10 companies in Boulder for the summer. They'd all be in space in an office in the summer that we would rent. We would spend the summer working with those companies. We'd give them a little bit of money, and we'd surround them with some smart people. Didn't have the word mentor at that time. And it would be more fun than investing angel investment at a time, because the thing he was unsatisfied about as a founder was he wasn't really getting to help these companies. Like, he's put his money in. He says, they only call me when either they need more money or something's messed up. Like, I want to help, and they don't really care. Or they don't know how to ask, or I don't know how to help. So I read through it, and we talked for a minute or two. I said, you know, what do you need? And he said, I'm going to put some money in. David Brown's going to put some money in. I'd like, and the numbers just so people have it, $80,000 from David Cohen, David Brown, $50,000. He said, and you know, we want another $100,000. Like, we've done the math, and we need $20,000 per company times 10 companies, and a little money to run the thing, and that'll be the thing. And I said to him, I love the idea. I'm in. And my language to him was, as long as you're not a flake or a crook, and I can figure that out in a day or two. And you need another $50,000. Hang on a sec. I walked out of the room into the hall. I called Jared Polis. Jared is now governor of Colorado, but he was a very successful entrepreneur and a good friend.
And a member of YEO.
And one of the original members of YEO Colorado. And I called him and I said, hey, Jared, I'm investing in this thing called Techstars. Can I tell you about it? I said, I'm investing $50,000 in this thing called Techstars. Can I tell you about it? And his response was, I'm in for $50,000. What is it? And I quickly told him. He says, great. And so I went back in the room and I said to David, who probably had heard of Jared by that point, I said, Jared Polis is in for $50,000. We're done fundraising. Let's go figure this thing out. And that's how Techstars got started.
All right. So now we go forward. Techstars are starting to pick up momentum, and you get to a stage of recognizing that the people who are helping the founders in Techstars are a very key element to make the program successful. So the term mentor evolves, and it was, I think, 2011 that David published the Mentor Manifesto, and talk about how that gets introduced, and then we'll dive into a couple of elements from the book.
So in 2007, I mean, we created this thing. We had absolutely no idea what it was, right? Just a one-page premise. And David said, as part of the one-page premise, when we said, okay, well, let's go organize this. By the way, there's an excruciating initial video that's the very first year video of us trying to recruit companies that every now and then we watch just to be humble.
I gotta dig that up.
It's pretty epic, epically bad. And we didn't have a .com at the time. We were techstars.org because somebody else had the .com. We had to buy the .com from somebody. David said, you know, I want to get more people like you and me, you know, around for the summer. You know, how do you think we can do that? I said, oh, that's easy. People remember the FOB thing with Bill Clinton, Friends of Bill? So the joke for the first year or two of Techstars was all the mentors were FOBs, Friends of Brad's. And so, you know, I reached out to a bunch of people I knew in Boulder, YOers and others. I reached out to some friends on the West Coast and some friends on the East Coast, mostly founders, a few investors. I said what we're doing. I said, hey, especially to the West and East Coast people, love to come, dinner's on me, come spend a day or two, let's hang out. And almost all of them came. And we said, you know, we want to list you as mentors to this thing. Is that okay? Yes, everybody says okay. And I don't know if we used the word mentor then, I can't remember. But what we ended up doing was, it was unreal. Like, we had this, we had about 50 people in that first mentor group. We had about 30 founders. And it was as fun as anything I'd ever done in my life around business. Right, that summer. Now, I didn't spend full time there because I had a full-time job. By now, we'd started Foundry. It was 2007. I was fundraising for Foundry, so I had a lot of fundraising going on that summer. But, you know, when I wasn't on the road, I was there. I'd go spend a day or half a day, and it was awesome. In year two, after we did that first year, we got some press around it. Also, how many people here know Startup Weekend? The first Startup Weekend happened in Boulder that summer as well. And that's the origin story. That's also Techstars, because one of the guys who was hanging around Techstars and kind of taking pictures of everybody, and that was kind of his role, named Andrew Hyde, said, I want to do this, but I want to do this for one weekend. And I want to see if we can start a company in one weekend. And David and I said, great, go for it. And my partner Seth and I bought all the food. We sponsored it for $1,000. We bought pizza, beer, pretzels, chips, Coke. And I went and I spent the weekend there. I didn't spend all night, but a bunch of people spent all night each night there. The room really smelled bad by the third day. And we created a thing called VoSnap, and we invented what's now called Goat Yoga, which was initially called Startup Yoga. You know, you stand up and you lift your laptop and you stretch and stuff. So it's just like that kind of energy happening in 2007. Again, remember, the backdrop before this was we're not really things are not really working again in the internet and in technology. We're still coming out of the the internet bubble. There's companies getting started again. And we're about to go straight into the financial crisis, where the world was going to end. And JP Morgan was going to be the only bank left, and they were going to be called the United States Bank of JP Morgan or something like that. I mean, it was bad. And so in 2008, we had a bunch of people reach out to us and say, hey, we want to do Techstars in Pick Your City. That's really cool, because we got some press for it. So we have no idea if this is a good thing or not. So we will tell you what we did. We will share all our documents with you. We will explain what we did. We will even come in a couple of cases. I want to come to Chicago. I'll come mentor. I'll be part of your program. And we essentially did the equivalent of open sourcing how this thing worked, which then begat a whole bunch of other accelerators, which I'm really proud of, because I didn't view the accelerator as a unique thing. I viewed it as a thing that should be able to exist everywhere. But it needed to be invented. It wasn't like, this is what it is. By 2011, we were starting to understand what good mentorship was, or what effective mentorship was, versus ineffective mentorship. And there was a lot that we did, and we did ourselves, but we experienced it was not effective. But David then got motivated to write down these 18 points that are not rules of mentoring. But it's a manifesto that says, here's things to think about to be an effective mentor. And when I wrote this book, I wanted to combine two concepts. One was this philosophy of give first with this notion of how to be an effective mentor, because they're reinforcing. And I think as we start to dig into a couple of the Mentor Manifesto things, I want to just emphasize that they too are philosophy, not rules. Right? They're guidelines. They're things to think about how to use effectively as a mentor or a mentee. And in the book, I do a lot of storytelling, because the rules are not like, and do it this way, boom, 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 boom. Actually, somebody sent me a note the other day that had a friend of mine who had written another book, whose book is good, but is very much, here is the framework for how you do it, step 1, step 2, step 3. And then here's part 2 of the framework, step 1, step 2, step 3. And his criticism was, I really wanted a framework. Which is totally fine. If you're looking for that, this is not that book. But if you're looking for like, okay, how do I incorporate some of this thinking into the way I am? That's where it comes from.
There are 18 points in the Mentor Manifesto.
And we'll be here till 4 o'clock.
Yeah. But if we pick a few, then I'll ask you to provide just a brief description of, and specifically on the why. Like, why this is an important point for being a mentor. And something you've touched on, but you maybe a little more clarity on, expect nothing in return. Why is this important as a mentor?
As a mentor, if you expect nothing, whatever comes back will be equal to or greater than what you expect. And coming into a non-transactional relationship, you will not feel good if your expectation is not met. So if you expect nothing, in your worst case, your expectation will be met. Now, very rarely is that what happens. You usually get more out of it than nothing. But one of the mistakes I think a lot of people make is, okay, I'll be a mentor if ... And we actually had a few people at the very beginning of Techstars, year 1, say, why would I do that? Why would I help? Well, you're not going to give me any money? Why would I help for free? And, I don't know, you won't. You're a very good friend. I like you very much. Goodbye. And I go to the next person. And we didn't even try. Year 2, most of the people who said, what am I going to get out of it? Said, can I be a mentor? That looks really fun. And, if I had said to him, it's going to be really fun. That's what you're going to get out of it. It's going to be awesome fun. You're like, huh? Right? But then when you see it, you're like, oh, I see. And by the way, to this day, there's still, I find it, I see it on, I'm out and about with the book, so the hater's going to hate is the life of anybody who is willing to put any ideas out there. People who have been mentors in Techstars or other programs for a long time. I've been a mentor for, many, many years, and it's just extractive, and you just get all this value from me for free, and I've never gotten anything from it. And the answer is step back. That's their issue. They're expecting something. They're doing it for an expectation versus a reason. They're not calibrating it against the backdrop of what they could get from it versus what they expect to get.
In a way, that is a good segue into another point on the Mentor Manifesto. The best mentor relationships eventually become two-way.
So I describe this as the ultimate magic trick of mentorship. It's not a hierarchy. It's not a mentor and a mentee. What you want is that to turn like this. So both the mentor and the mentee are learning from each other. It's actually one of the big differences between this concept, which in a corporate world, the closest thing to this in large companies is this notion of a sponsor, or in investment banking, it was called a rabbi. In some companies, it was called a mentor, where there's a senior person in the organization that you're an up-and-comer, you're climbing the corporate hierarchy, and you're assigned a senior person to help you effectively navigate the corporate hierarchy. And that's a very, very different phenomenon. It's nothing good or bad about it, it's different. But in that situation, it's always hierarchical. And I had this moment with Len where I'm at dinner, it's probably 1998 or 99, and we're at an Interlion thing. Maybe we bought a company or something, or we're trying to buy a company. And he's sitting about that far away from me, at the dinner. There's 10 people. And I can kind of hear him out of the corner of my ear, when you're at dinner with somebody and you kind of like to listen to the person, I don't want to be at the dinner really, but I'm here, but this is my buddy and I'm listening to him. And just heard him say Brad, and then he said something, I learn more from Brad now than he learns from me. And he wasn't talking me up, he was just having a conversation. I turned and I said, Len, what the fuck are you talking about? And Len's like, Brad, come on, dinner, trying to buy this company or whatever we're doing. And my response was, Len, really? And he said, no, Brad, the amount I'm learning from you from this experience we're having together is immense. I said, Len, the amount I have to learn from you is immense, doesn't cover it. It's like immense times immense. And he says, yeah, but that's part of the fun of it. And that was like a boom, right? That what happens is all of a sudden, that relationship isn't a hierarchical relationship anymore. And that's the magic trick.
So the last one I'll ask you to comment on in terms of the why. Have empathy. Remember, startups are hard.
So does anybody in this room think that it's easy to build a successful company? Just checking my premise. It's really hard. I've been involved in a lot of companies, both as a founder and an investor. I have failed at a lot. Every company, in my mind, is an endless series of hypotheses. You have a hypothesis, you run an experiment to test it, the experiment fails. You learn from that, you create a new hypothesis, you run another experiment, probably that experiment fails. And you keep doing it till an experiment works. You don't run the same hypothesis, you keep evolving your hypothesis. Now it works. Now do a bunch more of that, which, by the way, works for a while, and then one day it suddenly doesn't work anymore because something else changed. That's building a business. It's really hard. It's lonely to be a founder, even if you have co-founders. It's especially lonely to be a founder CEO. And it's even harder to be a founder CEO when you have co-founders especially when you have issues between each other in terms of how you're communicating, which, by the way, never, ever happens, right? Every founding team, it's smooth sailing from the beginning on.
Yeah, right.
And so this notion of empathy, which, by the way, is, again, against the backdrop of current environment, and not just political, business environment, teams, team dynamics, there's a leadership style that I personally find abhorrent, which is this notion of a leadership style that's a brutalistic style. It's a, we will only be successful by destroying anything in our way. And as a person, you're a resource for creating this outcome. And unless you're willing to sacrifice everything, you get where I'm going. And there's plenty of leaders that, pick how you emulate that. It's not my way. And am I more successful? Are they more successful? Don't care. Doesn't matter. Define success. What actually does that mean? I think this idea of having empathy, especially in the context of mentorship, leadership, in the way you comport yourself in this very, challenging and complicated thing we call life, is so fundamental and so powerful. And for me, it's been a huge part of the engine of getting through and building successful things, getting through difficult situations. There's a bunch of famous cliches like, starting a company is crawling across glass while eating fire. And yeah, it is. I have a line, I'll share this. I see Martin's ready for the next question, but I have a line. I like to say, today my job is I'm going to eat rocks today. Anybody here ever tried to eat a rock? I mean, anybody who's a founder in this room has had a day where all they did was eat rocks. It just kind of sucks. You have those days. But do you want to live your life that way? Do you want that to be the sum total of the experience of what you have to do to reach a successful outcome? I hope not. Some people do, but I just don't think that's a compelling style. So the mentor has to understand that the founder is eating rocks all the time. And if the mentor can't come to it with that kind of empathy, it's very, very difficult to be effective.
They're giving us the hook, but I want to ask, could we have 5 minutes? Are we beyond our exiting here at 3 o'clock? Is there something on the timeline that I need to be aware of?
We're cutting it close, so 5
Okay.
minutes.
Good. Because the question that I would really like you to at least give an overview, something that we're going to touch on again later today, but for this crowd, to talk about the creation of the Entrepreneurs Foundation of Colorado and the impact that the Entrepreneurs Foundation of Colorado has had.
So, Entrepreneurs Foundation of Colorado was started in 2011. No,
Oh,
it was
2007.
2007, 2006. Yeah, we got the 4-year thing going.
4
here.
years.
2007. Here's how it got started. A guy named Ryan Martins, who was a co-founder of a company called Rally Software. I was on the board of Rally. It went public in 2013 or 14. They were one of the early companies to create the discipline of agile software development. So it was a style of software development that today is commonplace, but at the time was unique. He and his co-founder, Tim Miller, built a really meaningful, successful business. They're on that journey. They're by no means a successful business at this point. And Ryan comes and sits down with me and says, I want to do what Benioff is doing.
Mark Benioff, the founder and CEO of Salesforce.
Right? I knew who Benioff was, but I had no idea what Ryan was talking about, which is pretty common with Ryan because he was a CTO. He would be ahead of the thinking. You'd have to say, all right, slow down, back up, tell me what you're thinking, because he already got to where he wanted to go. He described to me the Salesforce Foundation, the idea that Salesforce and Benioff had given 1% of the company to the Salesforce Foundation before they went public and endowed the organization. And there's a lot of other stuff in the history, but what he said is, I want to do that for Rally. I said, awesome, that shouldn't be hard. I'm sure the board will agree. He says, no, that's not enough. I want to do it for every company that's a startup in Colorado. And I said, okay, let's talk about that one more. He says, yeah, I want every company that's a startup in Colorado. We're going to make money from the community, like from different things and the dynamics of being here. We want to give back. And I don't want to depend on individual philanthropy. People can do their own thing, but these companies are benefiting from being part of this community, let's try to build that into the principle of how the companies work. And so I said, that's awesome, let's do that. So we ended up creating a thing called Entrepreneurs Foundation of Colorado. We figured out a way mathematically to do it that was very lightweight on the cap table, that if the company was like Raleigh was a Series C or Series D company, they could index back to what they were at the beginning, what 1% was, so that's how much they gave. So it wasn't, it was aligned with where companies were in their journey. And the companies figured out, chose how they each wanted to designate where the money went when it was worth something. So it wasn't like, and you have to give it to this, it was that each company got to choose how they decided what that was. It could be a founder chooses, it could be the CEO chooses, it could be the whole company has to vote at the exit, lots of different methodologies. The outcome of that activity is today over $10 million has gone back into Boulder in different philanthropic organizations as a result of that activity. And it continues because many of the companies will still have exits. A lot of them are zero, but those companies still were participants even though they didn't succeed. So the network effect and the value and the cultural norms get built in the community. That organization, about 4 or 5 years in, my partner Seth Levine and Ryan worked to put together a global organization called Pledge 1%. We were initially Pledge 1% Colorado. Now there's not local things. It's all Pledge 1%, but you have a local identity. And Pledge 1% now has had over $3 billion of gifts from startups that have gone public. Some of the ones in our portfolio that participated were like Avid Exchange, companies that you may know of, Atlassian, Yelp was a big participant, Twilio, SendGrid. And it's really this interesting phenomena where, again, the companies are deciding. So it's not philanthropic intent being abstracted away. It's changing the dynamic of the way fast growth startups think about the potential for contribution back to their communities that really helped support them become successful.
Have any emerging markets in the U.S. where there's not much startup density created such a foundation?
Yeah, there haven't been. It's interesting. When we started FCO, this is what we called it, there were about 8 other FCOs around the country. None of them contributed equity. They were all time. Okay. And the challenge that they were finding was they were all having trouble asking companies to contribute equity. They weren't figuring out how to do it. That model compressed into Pledge 1%. We figured out how to do it in Colorado. That turned into Pledge 1%. And that then became institutionalized in a way that's very effective because it can be very complicated for how the companies work. I think the ideal model for it, and I think this has happened in other, when you say emerging markets, other parts of the country, is using Pledge 1% as the vehicle for administering it so you don't have a cost load associated with it. Having a local organization, in Colorado we have an organization we call Colorado Startups, that's a nonprofit, that helps coordinate and promote. And this is an interesting thing. I think anybody that's involved in philanthropy, you and me both know this, the layer upon layer. You have to have a leader, but what you don't want to do is create layers upon layers upon layers. And so you have an active community foundation here, so that can be helpful if you want to house it there, or again integrating it directly into Pledge 1%, and then having the Colorado Startups equivalent of it in this region could work very effectively.
Well, obviously, I raised the question because we are thinking about these things now, and maybe there's somebody right here in this audience that could have interest in participating in this. So with that, I'm going to get the hook unless they let us ask questions from the audience. Are we out of time?
Well, you're making her really nervous. Come on.
No,
Two
not
questions.
nervous. 2 questions.
2 questions.
Okay. Of course, if there are no questions, then I guess
come on,
it will
don't be shy.
over.
Somebody's got a
All right.
question. All right, 5 more seconds. 5, 4. Go ahead.
How would you apply something like that to an upstate community, right? So if you want to do a Pledge 1%, how would you roll something like that out?
The question is, how would we take, in upstate New York where there's a lot of geographic disbursement, it's not a single community,
Yeah.
they're fragmented, what is the best approach to make something like that work in
Yeah.
upstate?
I would use a wrapper, upstate, just like Upstate Venture Connect. I live in Aspen, Colorado. Aspen's a 5,000 person town, even though it's got very high profile because it's a huge tourist town, but 5,000 people live there. It's not big enough to do critical mass around something like this. We refer to the area as a Roaring Fork Valley, which is Aspen all the way to Glenwood Springs. If you've ever been that part of the world, it's about 50,000 people, maybe 100,000 people now. That's plenty, right? So, draw your geographic boundary, put your imprint on the geographic boundary. And what you're doing, what the leadership is really making sure two things. One, everybody in that geographic community that's doing a startup is aware of the organization and how to engage. Again, you don't have to figure out and invent how to do it anymore because Pledge 1% has made it very, very simple and can handle any kind of situation. But then the container of engagement and activation is the local activity. So, 15, 20 companies all join. That's another network, and that's another network locally that they're part of. Yeah, sure, they can be part of the national network too, but they're really focused on being in the local network. This model is well understood. We lived it with YEO and many other things. But I think that's it. The driver is the motive force of a handful of founders who say, this is important to us. We want to model this behavior for other founders. By the way, one of the reasons FCO worked was Rally, Ryan. They were a high-profile company. Foundry gave 1% of our profits to FCO. Techstars gave 1% of its profits to FCO. And we did profits instead of equity because of the way our profits flow, because equity doesn't mean anything in a venture firm. But of our carry, when I get a check, and you add it all up, 1% of the money that my partners and I get goes into this pool. So you had people who were promoting it, who were participating and modeling it, rather than somebody saying, this is a good thing over here.
Yeah.
So really the motive force, I think, to move it is some founders.
Leading by example. And with that, I think, was there one more question? Oh, right here.
All right, so I feel like this group everybody here is divided into founders, and everybody who's not a founder here is in support of founders,
Yeah.
right? So from the support of founders, because it sounds like your experience is you're a founder and you work with a lot of founders. What's your advice for supporters? How to best encourage the founders, how to best help them navigate?
So I realize this is a founder-centric conversation. I don't actually divide the world that way. I divide the world into three categories. Leaders. This is in the context of startup communities. Anybody that's read those books will recognize this. And I messed this up, by the way, in the first book. So this is the improvement of it in the second book. In the first book, I just had two categories, leaders and feeders. And now I have leaders, instigators, and feeders. And the key is that you have to have founders and instigators be the leaders of the startup community. And the key thing there is people. And then the feeders are all the organizations. And feeders is not one down to leader. It's just a different role. And what I got back to was the idea that the individual people are the drivers of all the activity. And to your question specifically, if you're not a founder in the room, but you want to help founders, whether you're a mentor, an investor, an angel investor, a member of, I know there's some people from JPM here who would be, JPM would be a feeder, but the individuals here would be instigators, right? They're playing a leadership role in helping the startup community and helping the founders be successful. And so I think anybody as an individual who wants to engage in the startup community can and should. And the key is not to have it be organization-centric. The organizations all have other motivations. JP Morgan has other goals in their world other than just helping founders succeed. The startup community, I like to say, has one goal. Only one thing that it does is help founders succeed. So you orient your frame of reference around that, where the entrepreneurial ecosystem is the thing that's the bigger circle. And I don't know what your role or background is, but I hope everybody here can identify in some way, shape, or form, whether you're part of an organization or not, how can you engage? And if you're engaging, helping founders succeed, whether you are a founder or an instigator, that's really additive. Does that help? Yeah. But I said it, and I want to say it again. There's no hierarchy. If anything I say sounds like founders are better, it's not what it is. It's just trying to identify the different, and so that people can separate the thinking from the different frames of reference.
I guess my point is that I feel like a lot of the ecosystem has to be like founder driven, and I work with a lot of founders, but I don't know how to get them in the room together. Like I am statewide, so I work with companies all over New York, and I don't want to overextend this. But geographically, I can't physically put everybody in a room all the time. So,
You know what? You should send me a note separately, so that we spend more time on it. My email address. Other people can send me notes too. It's just brad@feld.com. Remind me that you were the last question, so that I can tie it back to something. And let me give you some stuff to play with that, because I understand that problem very well, and I think I can give you a few tools.
With that, let's give it up for my friend, Brad Feld. Thank you. And now we're going to be adjourning to the room next door. For anyone that would like a copy of the book, Give First. Take advantage of it. And those that have the opportunity to have Brad sign it, you're welcome to have him do that. But we are going to have to exit here promptly at 3 o'clock.
I have several requests on the book. Number one, if you like it, do all the normal thing that every author would love you to do. Make noise on social media about it, put up a review on Amazon, put up a review on Goodreads, buy another copy since somebody else bought this one and give it to somebody else. Like, do all those things. If you don't like it, throw it away and don't tell anybody.